I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to the teakink podcast. Today we have David, also known as Authentic Man on the Instagram, right?
Yeah.
How would you describe what you do?
Oh man, I struggle with this question.
Oh yeah? I mean, okay, title, let's say 3 words.
Oh no, I can answer the question. What's the answer today? Today is, what I really help men do is love more deeply.
You help men love more deeply. Why do you do that?
Because I struggled with this incredibly for many years.
Okay.
Like to the point where I questioned whether love existed. I didn't believe I could be in a relationship, especially if it was a committed relationship. I struggled with the whole idea of that for many years, and it was painful. And for a long time, I blamed women. I was like, it's all women's fault. It's the women I'm meeting. It's all their fault. And then eventually I came around to realizing like, oh, it's not the women I meet. It's me, which was probably a really pivotal moment. I don't remember the exact time that happened. It's more of a gradual thing over a few years. And when upon realizing that, everything started to change from my love life, especially from a point of view of purpose and what I wanted to do with my life. And as that started to change for me, I was like, oh, I can help some people with this. Let me share my information. And I started with a podcast. That's how I started. I just started talking on the podcast.
Okay. How long has that been now?
6 years.
Okay. And so when you started that podcast, where was your head at? And how does that look different to today in terms of what love is to you?
When I started the podcast, I was definitely believing that I didn't want to be in a monogamous relationship. I was like, I can love multiple people. I still believe I can love multiple people. I'm in a monogamous relationship and I have a child now, but I still believe I can love multiple people, something that I definitely have the capacity for. And I tried that. I did that for a while, and that was great. I learned a huge amount about myself. I learned how to communicate, actually, because I couldn't communicate. And when you start getting into more complex relationship dynamics, communication becomes even more important. And a lot of people kind of get into what they think is polyamory, or open relating, which is just what really they're doing is trying to find ways that they can just sleep with lots of people without having to really talk about it. But I was doing my best to be really ethical. So I was having very in-depth conversations about what I was up to and asking how they felt. And what I realized then was, especially with my now partner, it was like, wow, that's a lot of intense communication and a lot of intense emotional holding of someone else and even my own emotions. But it really equipped me to develop communication that felt safe. And also the one thing I've been scared of for many years is saying something to someone that would hurt them. So I had to keep sitting in front of my partner or partners and being like, hey, I want to sleep with someone else, or I just slept with somebody else. Like, how do you feel about that? And then they may cry or be upset, and I'd have to sit and listen to that. Something I didn't unconsciously, I didn't believe I could really have the capacity for, realizing that I have the capacity for. So it really shifted how I saw myself from a relational point of view. So just opened up a lot for me.
And when you were starting this podcast and you were exploring polyamory, what was this the very beginning of this journey of you understanding what love was and that you might have been responsible for not being able to have that?
No, I'd say that journey probably started probably, so that would have been, podcast started 6 years ago. I reckon that started maybe 5 to 7 years prior. And that was caused by some self-development workshops I did. Some self-development workshops. Okay. A company called Landmark, who are probably up the road somewhere, doing Houston somewhere here. And started to examine my relationship with my parents, first of all, and then started to kind of break down what the assumptions I was making about love. Like some of the assumptions I was making about relationships. And that starts to really shift something in the mind, because we don't often realize that we have assumptions about love and we don't realize we have assumptions. We just think that's how the world is.
What were your assumptions?
Love's dangerous, gonna get hurt, I'll never be a good enough partner. I always make mistakes and hurt someone. So it's better that I just leave. Or if someone expresses dissatisfaction, that means there's something wrong with me. not that there's something wrong with what I did, or that they just have some feelings. Yeah, exactly. So that would cause me to want to like leave relations very quickly and so forth. And as I started to kind of unravel these assumptions and see how they came up, whether that be in relationships or even around the work I wanted to do, some of the assumptions I was making there, you kind of see them arise. You feel the assumption arise of like, oh, I can't do this thing, or, you know, for a long time, I hated my tech job. I didn't want to be in it. And then I started to do some coaching. And for a while there was this kind of internal tension of like, oh, I can't do this as a career. I have to do this boring thing I dislike because that's how it is. And I kept kind of just consciously testing that. Like, is that actually true? Is that assumption really true? And I started to see that, oh, this assumption is just an assumption. It's not a truth of reality or truth of my life. Because we might see other people doing something, but that's them. They're special in some way. But us, we are incapable in some way. Or that was my story. So around love was the same. Was like, oh, I can't sustain a loving relationship. So I entered into relationships and I explored them, and I met the parts of me that were uncomfortable with love.
Okay, that's process. 11 years in, but what made you think to do that course at all?
I think a friend of mine, it's funny actually, because how the story goes is I was traveling through Scandinavia and I happened to be on my way to Iceland. I just landed in Iceland. And I remember where I was in this hostel room and I was on the bed, and he called me. I said, hey man, how you doing? He said, oh, I'm good, I'm great. I said, what have you been up to? He's like, I've been on this like weekend course, it's really good. I was like, really? He's like, when you come back, you should go on it. And we're still really good friends. I spoke to him today and I trust him very implicitly. But I remember on the call being like, I'll try that. And then I was partying in Iceland for 4 or 5 days, and I came back and he invited me to an evening and I got involved and I was in that work. And that's probably really the start of my kind of self-development journey of like consciously knowing that I can shift myself and my perspective of myself and some of the things that have held me back.
How do you do that?
Slow down, pause, notice the things you think, notice the assumptions you make, and the reactivity, I think, is a really good way. And it's not just the big things. I think sometimes we think like how we change is like, oh, I have to change like the really large things, but it's actually the minute decisions we make constantly. Like the things we say, the things we don't say, the ways we move away from the truth or saying the truth or saying what we want to say, or maybe even the moments where we just lean out of the connection. You know, with two people, there's always the option of I can come close and I can lean into this connection, or I can choose to move back a little bit. And it's those minute movements. And sometimes it's not even, sometimes it's physical, you know, in a relational moment where I actually do move back. But sometimes it's energetic, where I just pull my energy back. And it's just learning to notice when we do these things and having some kind of reflection and self-inquiry around, why do I think I did that? Well, is there a common pattern I'm seeing in my life? But that's a lifelong pursuit, I think.
Why do you think that that was out of reach or not something that was native to you at the beginning of this process?
I don't think I grew up in environments where people wanted to look at themselves in that way, to look at like what's created the way that I see the world and the way I think. You know, my mum is a Jamaican woman, grew up in Jamaica, came in when she was 18. My dad, similar, they met here. And it's not a very introspective culture. Or at that point, it wasn't a particularly introspective culture. And they're not particularly emotional people either. So when we're not emotional, we don't want to go near anything that's uncomfortably emotionally, uncomfortable emotions that may come from the past. So we want to ignore those. We don't want to go backwards. You know, I see that like my work where men come to me and to do some work around relationships or confidence or the way they see themselves. And they often go, I don't want to dig around in the past. I don't see the point in that. I want to just move forward. And I often say to them, well, the thing is that if there's a load of past stuff, emotions, experiences that sit in your subconscious, your unconscious, it's still replaying, it's still affecting how you make decisions and choices now. So it doesn't mean that it's not actually in the past. It's just that it's underneath your bed and you don't want to look under the bed.
And is that also an assumption of what progress and existences that we should just be looking forward?
Yeah. I think it's a very capitalist idea, isn't it? That we must always be growing and we're always moving forward. Moving backwards would be like rolling back in time and going back into
nostalgia or something that we need to move away from. I guess progress is maybe not necessarily as linear as people are taught.
Yeah. Especially like from a personal point of view, you know, we've got all these wonderful memes that like how we think our career progression is going to be like this. Well, actually it's a kind of like spotty, and it is a bit like that. And I think with kind of personal growth, it can very much be, I see it as like a more of a kind of spiral. You know, you come in from the outer layer and it just keeps spiraling, and you may go through these different quadrants of the same topics and areas and things, but you go a layer deeper each time. And sometimes you do get out to the surface, but it's quite cyclical, quite spiral, quite iterative.
And when you have people who come to you, at what point in these realizations are they? Are they heard a friend who talked about some weekend course, or is it all over? Or what makes people reach out to you?
Pain. People are in pain. Men are in pain. Usually breakups are the most common thing. Men come to me within either when the breakup is occurring, like they think it's occurring, they want to save the relationship, up to 6 months after the relationship. There's this breakup period. I would say like 70% of my clients come to me. But there's breakups, like a general life dissatisfaction, like feeling like they're not reaching potential, they're not engaging in life, relationship dissatisfaction, sexual dissatisfaction, pain. Pain is a really common thing. Every so often I get a man that comes to me and he's like, I want to know myself better. My life is good, but I want to know myself more deeply, or I want to explore who I am, or something like that. And that's great because it's a lot of fun, but usually it's pain.
And did you have any coaches as part of your?
Yeah. Ongoing. I've had a coach in some capacity for probably the last 8 years. Like somebody, like sometimes it's a business coach, sometimes a business / I've got a spiritual mentor that I usually speak to every so often and go and stay with her from time to time. She does a lovely kind of cleanse, she calls it. It's like how does she describe it? Mental, emotional, spiritual cleanse. So I go and see her. What else?
What does that consist of when you stay with her?
We'll stay with her. She lives a really magical existence. You know, she has this, I don't call it business or pursuit or vocation, where people come to her. She has no website. You can only find her through someone else that's been to her. You can only get her by phone number. She lives in the Midlands somewhere in a house. She's pretty off-grid, you know, doesn't have bank accounts and those sorts of things. And she's been through her own journey of healing herself from cancer and so forth. And she's very plugged in. She'll tell you things about herself that sometimes you sit and struggle to believe, you know. She's surfing in the astral plane and things like this. But a lot of the work with her on a very physical level is like diet, cleansing of the body. But there's also conversations with her. You just sit and have conversations, and she kind of pokes and prods and asks questions. And she's very grounded and firm, but also quite fun and quirky.
Okay.
Yeah, she's like a little magic woman wrapped up. You know, she's in her 60s now, and the energy she has for life is remarkable. So it's really beautiful. I've been and stayed with her maybe 4 or 5 times now.
Okay.
So yeah, it's really.
And that's the way that those sessions go. It's not on a phone. It's not on a.
No, you can once you've stayed with her, you can call her at any time, and you know if she's free, she'll pick up the phone and ask you how you are, and she'll listen and be very straight with you about the problem you have if you have a problem. But you go and stay with her for a week, and you down tools called the cleanse.
What's the diet?
Juice.
Okay. And I think I only really came to understand that coaches existed fairly recently. I mean, I also came from corporate, so you kind of understood that business coaches existed, but not really life-focused ones, internally focused things. And it's been an acclimatization to understand their worth, I guess, because we're so indoctrinated into thinking about systems of accreditation and all of this kind of thing. And I think I only really started to hear the term coach when I was living in Bali, which was maybe 7 years ago now. And it was a lot of people who gravitated towards me, a lot of sexual coaches who were quite interested in being around me, not really necessarily asking me for anything in particular, but I don't know why. Maybe you can tell me why people are interested in BDSM practitioners when they're coming from a sexual coaching space. And so I didn't get the greatest impression. And also I think Bali can be quite hype driven. And so my first initial experiences really put me kind of off of the topic. But I guess slowly over time, when you remain open-eyed, as you were sort of saying, you start to see people like you, or start to see people who have more authentic messaging, perhaps, and states of being that I kind of understood. And now I offer mentoring calls. Yeah, and it's not only people who are interested in doing the work that I do, but it's people who sort of recognize something, and they kind of would just like to be near that and see what that might do for them.
Yeah.
And I started to understand that it's like social exchange, but within a cultivated format of intention.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been quite interesting. And I've been wondering, like, I wonder what I could get. Maybe I'll get your spiritual juice person's number. If you would recommend me. But what made you think, oh, I'm going to step into that role?
It's funny because I first coached people. I worked in the pickup industry for a while, way back.
Which is picking up women.
Yeah. So that's like way back in, I was probably 23 or so.
Okay.
And I did that for about...
Baby!
I was a little boy. So sometimes I look at the pictures and I'm like, my God, that's an hilarious time of life. And it was a very hilarious time of life.
Did you take it very seriously?
No.
Okay.
No, I was just... it's funny, the way I said no there was very high.
It was very fast.
Yeah, it was very fast. Do you know why? I'm quite protective of pickup in a strange way. Not because when I got involved in it, it was the first time I was ever in groups of men who were really like giving each other feedback and really cared about each other's progress without trying to take anything from anybody, without trying to belittle anybody. It was just like a really wholesome group of guys I used to work with, some of which I still... Yeah, it was a really beautiful community of men. And we used to work together. We worked for a company here in London. And we would take these guys who were struggling in some way. I always remember there's one guy who always stands out to me. Tall, blonde guy. He looked like he could be a Calvin Klein model. He had terrible posture. He'd stand by a wall or a bar and he just like all crumpled in. And I remember walking in, it was a Friday night and we had these guys for the weekend. And I remember like, can I take him out tonight? And the guy leading it was like, why? I was like, I can work magic with this guy. I'm like, why? I was like, I can see already. So you take guys like him, lacked confidence to talk to women, was very shy, didn't really believe in himself, didn't realize that he had an amazing life to talk about. So you take him out and you take him into a bar or on the street. And my whole thing was that people want to have fun. People in clubs want to have fun, right? As a very simplistic, people want to have fun. So if you're having fun yourself in the space with yourself, with the people you're with, people will gravitate towards you, right? Simple as that. In a very simple context. So I used to take the guys out and we'd have fun. We wouldn't really drink, but we would laugh, we would joke, we would dance and have fun. And the byproduct of that was that they would feel good and they would talk to people and people would talk to them and their confidence would build with talking to women. And that's it. And my belief wasn't really this whole like, get woman in club, persuade her to leave with you, try and have sex with her. It wasn't really my jam. I didn't really kind of operate in that way.
Was there like a final outcome for this system that the community was interested in achieving?
I guess when I was teaching, my outcome for people was for them to break through the things that were holding them back.
Okay.
The fear they had, maybe they had fear of talking to women, or they had fear of expressing themselves openly and freely, or a fear of just laughing and having fun in a bar and club. Like if they could get through that, I felt like it was a really successful time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first experience of coaching. And then it soured towards, I did that for about a year on the side of my tech career, and it started to sour. I started to meet men who hated women. And that was something that I felt really uncomfortable with. Like once I started to have clients who were like that, I always remember this guy, and I had him on a Friday night, and his whole thing was like, I just want to take someone home. And I was like, that's not a great aim. And he was like, what do you mean? That's what I want to do. And I said, okay, that's not my game. So you're with me for the evening. Why don't we play my game for a while? And he's like, what's your game? And I was like, we're going to have fun in this bar, and we're going to get to know people in the bar, and we're going to enjoy our time. And what comes of that, wonderful. But that's the thing. He didn't like it. His thing is he wanted to talk to women. He wanted to get phone numbers. He wanted to take someone home. And he didn't really want to get to know people and understand them and so forth, which was really what I love to do with people. So he was one of the last clients I worked with in that company, because I was like, this is changing and I don't like this. So that was my first experience of coaching. So I guess fast forward.
Why did you enter that space? Why did you say, hey, I want to go to like a pickup community?
Oh, it's because I was struggling with women at that time. I was like, I can't understand why I'm not meeting the sort of women I really want to meet. So I started to learn, and then from learning, you learn something and you start teaching someone because you've learned about it, and you start helping people. And I wanted to, I always like to give back. It's kind of in my nature. And I guess fast forward kind of 10 years on from there, I had still the understanding of like human interaction and how people date and how people love and how people can get to know each other well. Plus, I kind of had this understanding of self-awareness and consciousness, and I kind of just brought them together as in my work. And I realized that there was a gap around dating, especially at that time, especially for men, because the whole thing about dating was like, it's all very mechanical. It's like you say this thing, you do this thing, and then it leads to like it's some sort of flow diagram. When it's not a flow diagram, is it? Dating's not a flow diagram in per se. It's more of a case of like, how can we emotionally connect with each other? Like what's there in the energy of two human beings that we can pull on the thread that actually makes this interaction have a spark and enjoyment? So I just started to talk about it, and I didn't want to coach anybody. I didn't want to coach. I had this coach at the time who he worked very intuitively, and he was like, the thing I see for you is you're going to help men go from where you were to closer to where you are. And I told him, fuck off, I don't want to do that. Because I didn't want to be a coach. I was like, I don't want to be a coach.
What was unappealing about it?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Responsibility?
No, I think what I believed about coaching, it's the story I had, I didn't believe I could make it a viable business in life. So I was like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. It's too much hassle. It's too much effort. It's too much energy. And then an old work colleague of mine messaged me after he listened to the podcast and was like, I could do with some help. Like, would you coach me? I said, yeah. I said, yeah, man, I'll help you out. And then I enjoyed it.
Client number one.
Client number one. Client number one.
Has it become a viable thing?
Yeah. So my partner's also a coach. So,
yes, I saw.
So we have some very fun conversations.
Were they a coach before you met?
Yeah. She was a coach.
Okay.
She had
Where do all these coaches meet? In Bali, there was literally a place called Coach Cafe.
Really? Bali's a funny place though, because there's like so many people who are like 23 years old and just got their life coaching certificate, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to be the best coach in the world. Yeah. But one of the things I think is important about coaching is experience, is life experience, right? Like experiencing the range of what it is to be a human being, because the old adage is this, like, you can only take someone as far as you've gone. I think there's a lot of truth in that, because there's moments where someone comes to me, like someone came to me recently, and he was saying he wants to be in a polyamorous relationship. The relationship he's in now is kind of murky. It's kind of open, but it's like, don't tell, don't ask, don't tell. And if I didn't have the emotional capacity to hold those conversations, if that was triggering to me or difficult for me to be in, or some area of life where I felt like a longing to have that thing and I don't have that thing, that gets in the way of my ability to support him, because my stuff's going to keep getting into the space. So my life experience of like going through that and being like okay with where I've landed in that and exploring those things means that when he tells me the things that's going on for me, I'm not stuck in my own thinking. I'm present to him because my stuff's just like flowing through the background. So I think sometimes with these kind of 22-year-old, 23-year-old life coaches, like I love their energy and their self-belief. But if someone comes to them and is like, I'm in the midst of a divorce of a relationship I've been in for 20 years and I've got 4 kids and I don't know how am I meant to navigate this. If they haven't processed their stuff around their parents getting divorced, that's going to get in the way of their ability to coach someone well and really listen.
And so I guess when you're talking to therapists, sometimes there's systems of, there's their, what do you call it? They're like their supervisor almost. Is there anything like that within coaching systems?
Yeah. Supervision. Yeah. I was part of a supervision circle for about 6 months this year, 8 months this year.
Maybe I need to be part of one.
Yeah, do dominations not have supervision?
That's the unfortunate thing. One of the many unfortunate things about not having a decrim space. You can't really gather as easily and start to think about systems that are going to be able to support each other. I mean, you have organizations and it's all very grassroots and there's a lot of people who do prefer that, but it means there's no standardization, and we all have to kind of learn the lesson ourselves a lot of the times. Like I never heard of a coach when I first started 15 years ago. You kind of had the elders around you in the dungeon and you listened quietly because there's no way they really wanted to tell you nicely. And you just sort of like osmosis, maybe one of them would be nice to you sometimes and then you'd be like trying to ask things politely here and there. But it wasn't, you couldn't ask things as freely as I try to make myself available now. And so I'm maybe one of the handful of people that I know who are doing this. Maybe we should form a little alliance and keep ourselves in check or something like this.
Yeah, just because and then this is my making an assumption here, is like in coaching you pick up a lot of emotional energy from people, right? And you're picking up a lot of, it's very intense emotional.
My job in general.
Yeah, it's an intense emotional.
I have a therapist.
Yeah. But if you had a space, for instance, where you met with maybe 4 other dominatrix and there was someone who was leading the group where you could bring some of your stuff and you could have a space to like express and not necessarily get advice, but just some feedback and even pointers could be really...
We do that informally.
Okay.
There's lots of downloading, nice. Nights on the sofa with champagne. Kicking off the stilettos, etc. But yeah, maybe something more formalized would be nice. That's a good idea. Thank you. So not bringing our shit basically into spaces where people are trusting us, right? And you've been doing this now since the beginning of the podcast, 6 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, how many people do you think you've seen, or what is kind of a capacity for you? Like when I first started, I don't think, there are some parallels, but I'm not going to necessarily draw them entirely. I kind of feel like when you're working with people, depending on who you are, there's like a craving for bringing a lot of that energy in and giving that energy out. And that can build up a lot, and it can build up a lot of information. It can make you that wealth of information, like you mentioned. We can only go as far as we take ourselves. But there's probably like a crux, there's like an upper limit of what that looks like. Or where do you situate yourself now? Like, how many are your clients now? They're all men. What are they sort of focused on? Are you happy with what that looks like? Has it been too much before?
I've definitely strayed into like taking on too many people. I think that's something we do as coaches. Like most coaches I know are like people who want to make the world a better place. I want to support people and help them. So
idealists? Idealists?
Yeah. Heart-led people, or even maybe people pleasers who want to like open their hearts and maybe give too much. And it's very easy to stray into that and have like too many clients. Like one-to-one clients wise, I kind of sit around the kind of 8-10 mark. That's my kind of capacity. Because I don't just support them in the calls that we have. I'm like there for them in between. So it's not unusual for me to then say, I don't know, yesterday I sat, after I'd been off for a couple of weeks, I sat and went through my WhatsApp and listened to any voice messages and got back to any messages and supported them with things and stuff like that. Kind of supported them in between, because I think that sort of support is like I see it's like an energetic holding through the sessions we have. It's not just, we speak for 90 minutes and I drop you for 2 weeks. It's like we speak for 90 minutes. If I'm thinking about you and I listen to a podcast, I'm going to send it to you. Or something comes up in your life that you're struggling with or you've had a win with, and you can share it with me. And
how long is this going on for?
Some of my clients I've worked with, one of my clients I've worked with for almost 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. This other guy, he just signed up for another year with me. So we worked together for 18 months before that. Mm-hmm.
So you go on annual retainers?
Yeah.
There are similarities between you and I.
Yeah, just work for people.
You can join my circle.
Yeah. Do you work with people in group as well? I do group work.
Have I done? Well, yeah. Thankfully, you can talk about quite a lot on this platform for some reason. I'll have like one person in the cage, one person in the chair, like a sub running in between them. Yeah, that's a group, right? Yeah. But in terms of, I've been thinking about that. Like, even though I try to make my coaching rates accessible, so accessible to me is like just over £100, because my usual rate for a session is a lot more than that. Yeah, and so I try to think of that. But I thought that also maybe is inaccessible to some people and what a group scenario could look like. But then I also think that, will that water that down? Is the fact that I'm doing all of these podcasts and that kind of thing, maybe that's my group version? I don't know. How do you run groups?
I run groups usually over a set period of time. And I find when you bring a group of people together, there's like a potency of learning. Because when someone's with you, they learn from you. Or, in coaching, it's not so much learning, it's more unpacking or me finding threads of things I said and journeying along them. When there's a group of people, someone might be unpacking and learning that they've had, or a struggle that they've had, or a win that they've had. And everyone else hears that. So then they listen to it from their lens and their perspective, and they'd be like, oh, wow, I've been doing that. That's something I do. Like, I did a program recently just for men who are avoidantly attached from an attachment style point of view.
Was that you?
That's me. Yeah. So it was 9 guys, and some of them, the biggest takeaways and biggest learnings that they then implemented in their lives came from other people's questions or other people's shares or other people's wins, or seeing the man who's just like them, doing difficult things, having difficult conversations with their partner or with someone they're dating or someone they love. So the group dynamic, it's like there's another layer to the way people learn. I think there's like an energy as well. So I really love group work.
Do you curate who gets to be in the group?
Yes. What
kind of process does that entail?
I'm just bringing together a community of men now for something a bit longer. It might be like an ongoing monthly thing, a couple sessions a month. I'm just speaking to everybody, actually. Going to have a quick 30-minute interview with everybody. Most of the guys in that actually are people who've worked with me before, so I don't need to vet them so heavily. Most of the guys I know in some capacity I've spoken to. So yeah, I like to talk to people and make sure that they're committed. Commitment is a really important thing, that they're really committed to the process, even when it gets hard. And I tell them I've told them very clearly, that's what's expected of you. And are you open to that? Are you in for that? It might not be easy. It might not be always be tidy. But that's the whole point, because that's how we grow and stretch. Maybe there's, some of the guys I'm like, what I see for you is that you struggle with emotional expression, for instance. It's like, hey, so you realize that some of the practices we're going to do, some of the embodiment practice we're going to do, I'm going to get you standing up and mimicking emotional states that might feel uncomfortable for you. You're happy to do that.
What was an emotional state that you were uncomfortable with?
For many years, I wouldn't say sadness. I'm okay with sad. You know what it would be? It's like big expressions of love, affection. I can be traditionally have this very interesting way in which I can be very charming upon first meeting. I can be very tactile and stuff. But once the love kind of deepens, there's a part of me that's doesn't want to show love. And I have to it's like an icy part of who I am. It doesn't want to show love. It wants to feel maybe the power of being slightly more aloof. So I've had to really kind of lean into that and notice that when that comes up, because it still comes up for me. So there was a workshop I was at, a weekend workshop, and I think it was the guy, he had us like act out like a giddy love for the person that was in front of us, you know? And I was like, oh, when he said it, I was like, oh, that's going to be feel a bit, okay, then I can lean into that. And like just embodying what that feels like, acting it out. Because I think there's a lot of power in
Role play.
Yeah, there is. It's like, but it's like incredible power in role play, right?
I agree.
Yeah, totally. I've met many dominatrix, and we really talked about like the parallels, the way that, you know, like over there you've got the cage, and it's like, oh, to be trapped, to feel what it's like to be trapped. You know, for someone, for instance, who lives a life where they're incredibly free and they can do whatever they want, and people always maybe surrender to them and succumb to them, for them to be trapped, they get to experience a new part of their psyche in those moments. And that can be really liberating for them or incredibly challenging for them.
Wonderful to watch.
Yeah, but it's still a process of a piece of growth.
Or it can be somebody who does feel trapped, but they use it to reframe because they are choosing to be in there. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a pleasurable experience.
Yeah. Then they can take that. Erotic. Then they can take that out into their life. And like in the moments when they feel trapped, they can go, I have a choice here. I don't.
This is actually kind of hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, I guess, the way that we kind of go about it that way. Yeah. So how do we do that for, maybe in my case, groups of mostly women? But yeah, so it's been 6 years. The first time somebody approached you via your podcast, which was an acquaintance, and now you do group work. Now you have people on annual retainers. What are some of the topics that you sort of decided to focus on? You said there was the anxious, avoidant man. Like, is there anything else that has kind of been a theme that you've wanted to focus on?
Yeah, there was a period a couple of years ago now, probably 18 months ago, where a lot of my clients are men who are in sexless relationships. I found that very interesting as a place to kind of work with, because it's not about obviously it's not about the sex. Right? There's always an emotional component in the relationship. There's a communication component. And I found that really interesting dynamic to work with men, and only working with the men, not working with the women, and seeing what was there. Because sometimes there was a fear for the men around sex, or the fear of their partners, for instance, you know, with that fear is about rejection from their partners. Or for some of men, and I think this is something that's come up more and more over the years, is, how do I say it? Men have heard so many stories of men violating women that they don't want to be that sort of man, and they don't trust the women. They don't trust women to be able to express and assert their boundaries. So they have to figure out their boundaries first and adhere to the boundaries that they think the woman actually has. And I definitely used to do this in my life as well. It's like, oh, I don't trust you to say no when you mean no. Which means I need to be so emotionally attuned and so attuned to your body that any sign of a no, a freeze, a back off, I need to translate that and like act accordingly. And for some men, that turns into kind of a hypersensitivity, and it means that they, with their own partners, they're not trying to have sex with them at all, because they're so concerned about overstepping a boundary that actually doesn't exist.
What's the solution to that?
It's actually really simple. With that piece, there's like a few very simple games you can play. Like, is it Betty Martin's game? It's not Betty Martin's game, but it comes from the Wheel of Consent, her body of work, the 3-minute game. It's like practicing yeses and nos with your partner, practicing strong yeses and nos. Like, yes, I want you to do that thing. No, I don't want that thing. And like playing with that, and also knowing that if someone says yes, and then also playing with like pulling away consent of like, actually, I'm doing this thing. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to stop. And like really believing your partner's in their power, and then experiencing them as that continuously over time. And it doesn't even have to be in sexual instances. That can just be in general instances in life. And then bring that into the bedroom. And then slowly that erodes around, the trust builds between the two people. But more for the man, I think, is to kind of step out this idea that women, to put very simply, is like they're feeble. They're feeble and they're kind of porcelain, and they're easily broken.
And how would you achieve that state of understanding outside of a relationship and in their interactions with people out and about? Because I think that kind of hesitancy lives on a lot of men, just in interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is there an approach for that also? Have you ever kind of encountered somebody with that question?
Yeah. Many years ago. I think the ultimately it comes to experience, trying things, because obviously a man might go, oh, well, I can't say these things because these things are lewd. Actually, I had a client of mine actually, and he had this whole thing about what he can do, not necessarily with a woman, but in interaction with a woman. But that's rude, that's inappropriate, that's harassment. And I was like, go try it. Because when he explained what the things were, they weren't like grabbing people or anything like that. It was like very, very simple things like talking to a stranger in a bar or going up to someone who's in a shop. And I was like, go try them. I was like, write a list of these 10 things. And in the next 2 weeks, go try as many of these as you can and just see what the reaction is. But not just the initial reaction that you imagine is going to happen. Like actually be present to the actual reaction you get. Does someone smile? Do they give you eye contact? Do they ask you a question? Do you get into a conversation? And he went out and tried these things. He tried about 6 of them. And one of them was like talking to someone in a shop, like a random woman in a shop and having a conversation. And he noted, he's like, oh yeah, I thought that this was going to happen. But when I did it, the woman was like, oh, hey, how are you doing? They had a conversation. They laughed a little bit and they both went on their way. And I was like, she didn't call the police. He was like, no. I was like, wow, that's a miracle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So I first this reminds me of an experience I guess I've had as a young adult to now. I would say that's been a period of maybe 25 years or so. And one place in particular always stands out to me because that was the first place that I ever really experienced a lot of male attention. And it was New York. And I go back, I've never lived there, but I go back every year, every couple of years. And the landscape of that city has changed in terms of interaction and connectivity a lot, and in terms of male attention. And when I was younger and I looked different, I had a shaved head at one point, I had long hair. It's just like, didn't really matter the form. I would get stalked. I'd get like all sorts of different, very creative ways in terms of how people would try to interact with me, whether that would be a blatant like stalking or talking or like playing a game so that I would stop. You know, for example, saying that I dropped something when I clearly didn't. Oh, that was pretty smart though. Yeah, like definitely I don't draw stuff. I'm going to keep walking. But lately, I feel like men will tense up when you come close.
Yeah.
Even groups of men, you know, like classic, like in our minds, groups of construction workers, they'll all just kind of slow down and like hold themselves and not look anywhere. And when you pass, maybe they'll like sort of talk to each other, but they haven't interacted with me at all. And I've actually been quite pleased. So on one hand, it's like I get that there's a tension, and I do hear this thing that I mentioned to you earlier about that they don't know where that boundary lies. But at the same time, it does make for a more peaceful daily experience for me. And so I guess I wonder what the middle ground is, which reminds me of another time when I was in Norway fairly recently, and this young boy, I would say 16 or 17. I mean, I'm 40 now, so, but maybe I don't look like that to him. There's not so many Asians around. But I was in a museum, and he just sort of like doesn't step directly in front of me, but just sort of just a little bit, like at an angle. And he said, I just wanted to tell you that you look really good today. And then he sort of stepped out. And he didn't go anywhere, but he didn't block my way either.
He left the space open for you. Yeah.
And I just said, thank you. And I remember that, and I tell people about it all the time. And I kept walking. I mean, the poor thing was a child. I'm not going to interact any further. But it was just like, I don't know if anyone's ever approached me like that before. And maybe if there was like an attraction and of legal age, etc., that would have been a moment that I would have leapt into, and it still stays with me, you know? So I guess like, how did that young boy understand to do those things? I guess also quite naturally, because very young, but nobody's necessarily taught him verbally perhaps yet. What about that scenario? Is it like the Norwegian government and their incredible wealth? I paid $40 for a bloody protein shake and a protein ball at one point. Is it that? Yeah. Like, where do you see us getting to a point where relating and feeling contentment and being able to feel and express joy? Do you see us getting to that place, and how would we? What are the factors for that?
Yeah. And it's interesting the way you described that moment with him. You describe it quite beautifully, like it was quite a beautiful moment for you to experience. And I think I did a podcast with a woman, a Canadian woman, Clementine, and we talked about attunement. And that's what it is, right? In that moment, there's like quite a few bits that you described, I really loved about what he did, is there's a lot of like a emotional and physical attunement to the moment, right? He's seen you, he's noticed you. He wants to talk to you, so he does, but he doesn't come, he's very aware of the space. He's very aware that like there's walls and there's other people and where those things are. That might be very natural to him, but he might have learned those things, or everything we kind of learn, right? In some capacity, in some way, even if we just absorb it from seeing people. So he stood in a place, because this is something when I used to help guys meet women on the street, is you like, don't block someone's exits. As soon as if you were standing in that corner and I stood right in front of you, your nervous system starts to feel trapped, right? But if you're standing in that corner and I stand on this wall here, you've still got all the space to do whatever you want to do. You don't feel cornered, you don't feel trapped. So you're going to be more relaxed to whatever I say. Like, even if I say something stupid, right? You're going to be more like, well, I can just leave any moment. So it's what I see we need is like more attunement to each other. And I think this is something that's very difficult for men, because we don't grow up with the emotional attunement in the same way women do in general, being in groups of women, talking, chatting, watching, observing how other people are, looking at people's eye contact, looking how people move in spaces. We don't necessarily do that. We're out kicking balls and fighting with each other and shouting and screaming, right? I've got a little nephew and I've got a little boy, he's 6 months old, but I've got a little nephew, and it's very interesting to observe him, even though he lives in a house with my mum, his mother, my sister, and my other sister. So he's in a house of women, pretty much. But the boisterousness that's kind of coming through and having to teach him about emotions and so forth. But those things kind of get taught out of us. Like, I see him at 5 years old and he's very tactile and he wants to run and hug you. But I know that over the next kind of 8 years of his life, that will be kind of beaten out of him by society. And when I say society, I mean school, his friends, even to some degree his mother and the people around him, because he will see that that's not how men are
supposed to be.
Yeah, how men are supposed to be. It's changing slowly, but there's enough kind of research to see. There's something called the man box rules, and they I think the research they did was over kids over a period of time, and saw how at 8 years old they've got a best friend who they love, and they'll tell you they love them. When you meet those kids at 13 years old, you ask them about that best friend, they're like, yeah, he's cool, no homo. And you're like, how did we get, what shifted? So yeah. I guess the thing is that what for us to relate better is an attunement to each other, because there's like an under attunement, which a lot of men struggle with. Like when you talk about the builders who will catcall and scream at women and so forth, they kind of suffer traditionally from an under attunement to other people. They're so in their experience of like, she's hot, I want to tell her she's hot from the top of this building, or I want to say, all right, sexy, or whatever it is, because he's only thinking about what he wants and what he wants to say and how it feels for him.
And how he is with his friends and yes. perceived by his
But he's
friends.
not perceiving about how does it feel for her, for me to do this from this place? Like, how does that impact her? And I think then there's kind of over-attunement, which there's a lot of men in this space more and more, the men who are kind of checking out of dating and relationships, where they don't present as being overly attuned, but what it is they're kind of overly attuned to rejection. Rejection hurts them very much. They struggle with that sort of thing, or they have a lot of fear about women, or they have a lot of fear about being seen as harassive, or of what could go wrong in a relationship, or all these sorts of things. So there's like this middle attunement where we know what we want and we kind of go for what we want, but we also consider it someone else and what's going on for them. And there is a very it's a very grey area, that middle space, but actually that's how we relate, because there's enough risk in there, but enough comfort and safety for us to kind of move into just attraction. And I think the key is knowing where you are on this kind of scale and attuning yourself appropriately. Like maybe you're too sensitive and like rejection leaves you in a heap on the floor crying for 2 days. So, okay, you need to like become a bit more resilient to something like rejection or other people's opinions. Or if you're under attuned and you're upsetting and offending people constantly, then actually what it is, you need to learn to be more emotionally attuned to people and spaces. And you know, for men, often the experiences of women, what's it like to be a woman? You know, what's it like to be you for a day? You know, where, like you said, like you're having this attention constantly that doesn't, as many men would feel like, oh, having attention is great because they don't get any attention. But when you get so much attention, it becomes both oppressive and becomes, I'm just making assumptions here because I don't know fully, becomes oppressive, but it also feels aggressive.
Yeah.
And most men can't really fathom that because they don't ever really have an experience where they walk into a bar and everyone wants to talk to them. Most men have never got anywhere near that experience. Most men never even experienced having women look at them and smile. So, and because of that, they don't know what it's like to be on the
far divide.
Yeah, they don't know what it's like to be on the receiving end of the kind of constant attention throughout an evening. So they don't learn how to be like, oh, there's a woman over there I'm attracted to and I'm interested. And going past the attraction as well, something I talk a lot to about men. It's like, look, there's beautiful people everywhere, right? There's beautiful women everywhere. But what's underneath that? Who is someone? Because I think a lot of men also get really mentally clouded just by beauty. Oh my God, I've seen a beautiful woman. And you can see the brain parts of their brain start to shut down. Like their mouth stops moving, their eyes become transfixed.
Women also.
But they don't know how to then be like, who is this person? Like what's underneath this beauty, this wonderful, beautiful shell, but who is the core of this human being? What's their soul? What's meaningful to them? And knowing how to do that because they get so stuck on the beautiful part.
Yeah. Teaching them to value things that are more than just an initial look.
Depth.
Yeah. Teaching people depth. Everybody has it. It's just about how they sort of access it.
Yeah, but both access it in themselves because we don't always think that we have any depth of ourselves, or we've been taught somewhere that, you know, there's parts of ourselves.
Does everyone have depth? I believe that it's possible.
I believe it's there for everybody, but it might take some work for us to find those deeper aspects of ourselves because we may have cut ourselves off for them for some reason. We felt, you know, we should hide those parts of us where it is. But it's also being able to mine it in other people, be able to like be with somebody in a moment. And I think this is one of the most beautiful skills that someone can do in the dating or relational sense is like, I can be with you in this relational moment. I can listen to everything you've said and I can piece what you've said about yourself together. And then I can give you a lens or perspective on yourself that maybe you've never looked at yourself in that way or thought about. But because I've listened so deeply to who you are, I've now helped you go deeper into you.
Now people fall in love with that person.
Yeah. That's a dangerous skill.
I've been in my job long enough. Yeah. But just like to talk about exercises around perspective, there's this one thing that I do with a lot of clients that I'll work with. I do some hours here and there, but sometimes I have clients that are with me for longer periods of time. And in order for me to kind of meet them, we need to share more perspective. Because I've been around a lot of people from a certain demographic, I can kind of understand where they're coming from, but they don't have any clue, like you say, about where I come from and my experience of the world. And they've never really necessarily had to think about that either. You know, maybe they've had access to wealth, maybe they've had access to people who are always listening to what they say, and nobody's necessarily been questioning them. And maybe I'm the first instance of that. But one of the exercises that I do is that I make them walk behind me, like maybe 20 meters or so, 15, 20 meters. And I just walk. I just walk down a busy street. And I tell them not to come up to me for like 15 minutes. They almost never make it to 15 minutes because they start to see people looking at me, you know, or trying to talk to me, or hesitating and then trying to talk to me, or following, or like stopping and staring or something. And they're shocked.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah. So understand that I walk through the world differently and start to anticipate how I am seeing things.
Mm.
And then you can serve me.
Mm.
But before that point, it's not going to happen. And you're
Mm.
just serving yourself.
Mm.
So that's why I do it.
That's a
because
beautiful exercise.
I can't meet them, and it's frustrating being around them
Yeah,
if they're not going to try to see how I like my tea,
Mm.
Because of where I'm coming from.
Mm.
Yeah. Or how I will need a space, or how you can think about my safety and my comfort.
Mm.
Yeah. But that's my motivations, and it's, from a different angle.
But it's also a really beautiful perception exercise, because we are often so self-centered, right? We are so in ourselves and our own kind of little, we're the center of the world. We don't place ourselves in other people. And it's like, it can be a real kind of embodied experience of life. I place my attention on you, and I place enough of my attention on you, I can start to feel what it's like to be you. But I need to have had some experience of doing that and being in the world of like, okay, what's it like being you in the world? Like, okay, people must really striking way of moving around the world. So that kind of like jolts people in a way, because they're like, oh, I don't know what I've just experienced here. So then that kicks them into something strange. And the things you describe, people walking after you, looking at you, so forth, because it's like they've experienced something different. But if I can't put myself into that position because I'm so in my own view of the world, or even my view of you, then I can't really be with you, and I think this is something that I call it it's just kind of a level of empathy and compassion. And I think it's something we're really lacking in the world. Like, we don't do very well of putting ourselves in people's, like, empathetically and compassionately people's shoes to be like, what's it like to be them? Like, our world would be a very, very different place, in my opinion, if we had greater capacity for empathy and compassion.
Asking that question, why do you think people avoid it?
It's uncomfortable, because if you suddenly start to put yourself into other people's positions, you have to it's almost like if I put myself into your position, I'm looking back at myself and I'm going to see parts of myself and things that I've done, and I might start feeling guilt and shame, right? Or, we've just gone through this 4 years. For instance, a really good example that's easy for me to remember is like, post George Floyd, we're in pandemic, George Floyd was murdered. And there was a lot of people that were suddenly like, a lot of white people suddenly like, wait a minute, I didn't think I was racist. And now I realize I've done these things and I've said these things, because they put themselves in the position of maybe some friends and family or people they didn't know was just a man who died. And they looked back at themselves and it was uncomfortable. And normally it would have been very easy for people to pass that by, because they would have had their life and their work and their drinking and their drugs or whatever. Yeah. But suddenly everyone was just sitting at home. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have any distractions to grip onto. And I think that's a big part of my work, is like compassion, not just for my clients, but also then taking them and asking them the questions, especially when it's men in a relationship or we're talking about relating. And I'm like, okay, so how does that feel when you do that thing that you're doing there, or you think that thing? How does that feel for your partner or the woman that you're dating? What's their experience of you in those moments? Because like that question there starts to open up, and they're like, wait, okay. So when I shut down because I'm scared about hurting her feelings, that might be received to her as I'm cold and uncaring and don't really care about her. And I don't want to talk to her, and what she's thinking is unimportant because I'm so in mine. And then suddenly it's like we start getting outside of ourselves, and we can relate more cleanly and we can relate more honestly. But I don't think that process of doing that empathy and that compassion is something that our society really teaches us to do. And especially our kind of dating culture and relationship culture doesn't. It kind of often teaches us like that we're right and someone else is wrong. And then we have people in our lives, if we're unfortunate, we have people in our lives that are kind of like, yes, men. They're like, yeah, you deserve better. It's all their fault. And that doesn't help us grow. That kind of entrenches us in our kind of assumptions and beliefs that don't help us relate.
That makes me think a little bit about, I mean, I'm not saying that there's a lot of it that I don't necessarily resonate with, but sometimes there's some messaging around Patriarchy and Reparations. And what are kind of your thoughts around that conversation or that approach? Or I guess that's kind of been internalized in a very negative way from some of the things you said about the fears that men are bringing into interactions. But where does that sort of sit in the things that you are communicating? Or is it less about the context and more about the interaction for you?
Yeah, I think it has to, you can't leave that out. And if the patriarchy, you know, I haven't probably read enough, but I've done plenty of reading and listening. I think sometimes what we do is we collapse two things together. It's like we collapse men and patriarchy to be one thing. And sometimes it's not even said that, but it's like the undertone of the conversations or the content is often that. And I think we have to remember that the patriarchy is a system, like a world system, that most men aren't really, like, if we look at it and go, okay, there's the patriarchy and it's oppressing women, you're like, yes, it probably oppresses X number of women, percentage of women across the world. But there's probably a thin slice of women in there that are actually propping it up as much as the men involved in it, because they
I think most people are propping it up.
They're to certain degrees, right? But they're prospering. They're prospering from it, right?
Yeah. Also unconsciously.
Oh, completely.
Mostly unconsciously.
Yeah. But then I don't also think the patriarchy doesn't benefit men particularly much either. There probably does like another thin slice of men, yes, that might be thicker. That percentage of men, it might be larger than the percentage of women, most likely. But there's also a big percentage of women, men that are really like oppressed in that. Like even from simple ways, I look at the emotional aspect of being a man, and something I've worked with a lot. It's like that's really oppressive for men. But we're talking about this huge system of governance, and we say, oh, you know, men just need to change. But it's like, how do you change? How do you change beyond what the circle that you've lived in your whole life? If everyone's just lived in this one box, which is we all have, and we're saying we need to break the box, but we don't know how to break the box. We don't know how to get out of the box because the box is all we've known, and we're distracted through work and phones and all stuff. So I think sometimes there's this collapsing, and there's a lot of anger from mainly women for very good reason. I never say for not good reason, for very good reason towards men. But I think sometimes it's not useful in creating the world that we want, because if I'm just angry at all men, right, then my anger has to go somewhere, and that anger is going to be directed at men. And the men that receive that are going to be like, oh, well, I kind of want to support you, but you're so angry at me, I feel attacked, right? So I'm just going to move away. I'm not going to join your crusade because I don't feel welcome, because all your crusades is saying men are all a piece of shit and trash. And I'm a man. So that means that you think I'm a piece of shit and trash. So I'm not welcome here. I'm going to make that assumption. And I think that's a very simplistic way of explaining that. But I think there's a lot of men who feel that they are suffering for the sins of their fathers, or the sins of the men before them, or even sometimes I say, like, when people talk about the patriarchy and they talk about, you know, men have done these things. I'm like, I'm a black man. Like, Miss Middle Upper Class white woman, don't talk to me about patriarchy, right? When my parents are, like, I can go back a few generations and my family was in slavery. Like, you were probably sitting up in a nice white house somewhere in the UK, living off plantation money. So don't talk to me about oppression. Right? Because your family may have upheld it to get to where you have. So it's looking at the fact there's this so much nuance to people's positioning within the patriarchy and their benefit, but we're all kind of upholding capitalism, really, because, you know, I'm a coach and I have a business. You know, you're a dominatrix and you're a coach and you have a business, and we want stuff. And it's like, to some degree, we're upholding the system.
We're not living in the Midlands trading in cash.
No, and we're not like trying to break the system and get out of the system and, you know, live off grid, because that doesn't feel very appealing. So in many ways, we're all just in this system that doesn't really benefit us, that teaches us things about ourselves, about men, about women that aren't necessarily useful. And it's just a very difficult, just think it's so nuanced and complex. But then there's also some very simple aspects to it that I look at. You know, I look at the case of the French woman whose name I can never remember, and the husband and the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. Pelicot.
Yeah. And you look at that and go, well, in my eyes, that's very simple for the men who would have frequented the websites. It's like, oh, you go onto this website and you're like, oh, this dude's asking me something. This isn't cool. This isn't right. Like, I want to do something about this. And then I get into their heads because I start to think like, hey, why wouldn't a guy do something?
Question it.
Why wouldn't he question it? The shame, because he's there. He's on the website. So by going to the police, he'd have to admit that he's on that website and he might be involved in other things. So the shame would stop someone from even doing something about it. Like, why? What would drive those men to do that thing? Is it they want the sexual gratification? Have they been taught that women's consent is meaningless, or, you know, women are a piece of objects? It's like, it's all these like really subtle threads that are occurring in society and the learning we get that we aren't always aware of, but we're acting out. And if we're not aware of it, we're not aware that I view women's needs as lesser than. But it could be these tiny moments in my life where I do this that I'm not aware of. But I think that, you know, that case is a really powerful, sad and powerful case because, you know, I wrote about this, like, it gives us a moment to like look and go, okay, I'm not one of those guys. If that's like 100% kind of bad, right? Where am I on that scale? But where am I like 3%? Where am I?
I think the danger is that those people could have been many people.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there is the scale that they are the 100% bad. I think the problem is that all of those threads, all of that nuance that you're saying, it could have been anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of all of those threads. They're not 100% bad.
No.
They are like perfect. They got caught.
Yeah. They got caught.
Yeah. And I think there's many people who are completely average and normal, like they were in their, where they lived and what they were doing for work and the family. It was a range of people. It's not like it was a certain type of person, you know? It's just the structure of that we are within and what it's breeding in our interactions in general. And
then the rationalization that we put on that what we're doing is okay, right? Like, as humans, as people, I think we overestimate how aware we are and how conscious we are of the things that we're doing. And we don't allow ourselves to critically look at ourselves enough and go, I
could be wrong.
Yeah. Or the way that we rationalize something, you know, like I imagine these guys, they rationalize it like, oh, the husband said it's okay, so it must be okay. Like, where's the critical thinking there of like, wait a minute, I know this dude said this is okay, but really, is this okay? Like, can I see a video of her? Could I have a conversation with her on a shoot the week before to say that they're both together and we're talking about doing this thing?
Yeah.
But I rationalized that what that man said, the husband said, is okay. So it's like these moments in life where the kind of assumption we make, that we have to kind of really stop and ask ourselves like, oh, wait a minute. Is this really who I am? Is this really okay? Is this really the thing I think it is? And is that rationalization has to come in because sometimes the desire we have for something is so strong that we allow the rationalization to happen so that we can get the thing that we want.
And I think also it's important to not do that process only in isolation, on your own, because if you're like me, you can rationalize almost anything.
Yeah, you can rationalize anything.
In my head.
Yeah.
But then when you have the people around you who are not yes people, exactly. If you have a coach that you feel a little bit of an abrasion with as opposed to complete ease. That's another thing. It's like sometimes I get a little bit suspicious when my therapist is 100% supportive.
Yeah.
I'm like, I gotta be wrong on some level here. Yeah. You know? like, I don't know about this. Yeah, and then I guess spreading the opinions that you're gathering, and there's that pressure also of getting it 100% right. Obviously, there are scenarios where people can really get hurt if you make a decision. But I guess it's just life is hard.
Life is hard. And I think it's so important when you sit there about having people around you. I like to have people in my life who know they can really tell me the truth, even when I don't like the truth. Yeah. And I'm not going to cut them out of my life. I'm not going to stop talking to them because I think we've got into a cycle sometimes with many people in their life is that if their friends disagree with them or tell them something they don't like, they're like, you're toxic, get out of my life. But it's really healthy to have people in your life who will really challenge you. And I see that as a lack for a lot of men, that's what I see really lacking. And like, as my role when I coach someone is like, I will really challenge them, even when I agree with them.
Yeah.
Even, not agree with them because my opinion doesn't really matter, but even when I see the logic in what they're saying, but I will really challenge it because otherwise they don't get the experience of critically thinking about the thing that they're doing or they want to do or they've done or whatever. Because it's a practice. Because when we start practicing, like going, oh yeah, I want to turn on the light, but am I turning on the light? I want to have the light on during sex. Am I doing that because I want to be able to see everything? Or is that there's some way of I'm trying to control the situation? That's a good question to ask myself. And then we start practicing asking ourselves questions that challenge our thought process and ideas. And that's how we kind of grow in our level of awareness and consciousness. And if we've practiced at that in the moments when we're maybe higher stress, we're able to also do that in those moments, because those are the times when we will just rationalize very quickly or just move out of reaction. And that's when real harm can happen, whether that's like in relationship or in work or whatever. But like in the moments of high stress, I find it's like those are the moments that really test us.
I feel like we could talk for a long time, but I need to try to wrap it up somehow. But I will go off on a slight tangent and say that I've always been curious about myself. I was mostly on my, I've had siblings at different points in time, but I was mostly on my own. And so therefore your own internal thought process can sometimes be what keeps you company and you can become familiar with it. So I have always had that curiosity. But when I started to have enough money, like in my perception nowadays, I don't think that's enough money. But I thought, okay, maybe this is time where I can sort of take a break and start to do things for my mental health, which is like terrible. That's the way that we're structured. It's like capitalism says, okay, now you can do luxurious things like thinking about the state of your brain. That should be an ongoing thread. But I went to a meditation retreat and that kind of taught me a lot about that, those high stress moments, because there was a practice within the practice where you're not allowed to move at all for about an hour. And
Vipassana?
Yeah. Have you practiced it too?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, it just reformats your relationship to pain because you're not used to sitting that still. And your body's like, oh my God, this thing, it's killing you. You're going to die if you don't move your toe this much at least. There's all of these negotiations. And after a while, when you just keep sitting, it's like nothing. And sure, there are still some days that some other thought comes up. But if you do it long enough, like for many years or whatever, however many hours, you start to understand that, sometimes you're just going to try to rationalize yourself out of that space. You just told yourself you're going to do the hour, just do the damn hour. It's not going to kill you. Yeah. And so that's kind of reformatted how I have approached high stress in general. It's it gives you that step back, like you said. Yeah. To be like, yeah, that's pain. As opposed to like, oh my God, move the toe, Yeah, and I guess it's just all of us just trying to figure out different ways to cut ourselves some slack in some ways, perhaps. There's a lot of pressure in existence rather than not. I can almost feel like sometimes you see people who maybe look like they've checked out, they're lazy, but actually that's also just pressure, reformatting in another way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't they teach you this shit when you're young?
God, schools don't want us knowing this when we're young because we would just like, we wouldn't fall into the kind of system. Imagine every child was sent on Vipassana at 16 years old or 21 years old. People would come out and go, I don't want to go and study that degree that my dad wants me to do. I've just realized I've been living my whole life for my father. Like, fuck that. I'm going to go and do something I want to do. We'd all, we'd shuffle out of things.
We wouldn't be the good little cogs that industry has needed us to be. But perhaps when AI takes over everything and we have universal basic income, what are we going to become?
Utopia.
Insufferable, and then maybe utopia.
Yeah. Universal basic income would be Because that's where we could get to if we want to, once we have enough robots and AI and stuff, is that...
I mean, we could have it now if people
weren't so greedy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem, right, with humans, is that we don't have this life of, I don't know if peace is a word, but like contentment, like even having the basic needs, is because of greed. And it's like, what would it take for the human race to, because we'll never eliminate greed completely, but eliminate greed enough that everyone could just be comfortable and, like, I don't want to use the word happy, comfortable, content, and have what they need, and then choose how they want to live. Like, I think that's a really beautiful future that we can, but our level of awareness and consciousness would need to rise kind of globally, or at least at our leaders level, for us to kind of get there. And I think we'll get there. I just don't know how many hundreds of years it will take.
I don't know. Now we could talk about the way that humanity has evolved and where it could go, but we'll be here for ages. So maybe we'll have to do that another time. But that is quite an interesting thought, maybe to sort of leave with. Like, I wonder if we have changed, if our minds have changed, if our approach to things has changed much over the course of Homo sapiens existing, or whether it is quite literally like a neurological shift that needs to happen, because there's just still so much living in fear and dominance, which comes from fear of lacking power, right? Whether there's really something physiologically that needs to change. Because I don't know whether humanity in its current way actually has a way out of all of that. Because it's really hard work to have a way out of it.
Yeah.
You got to spend hours sitting in that stupid position, or like take the ayahuasca, or like find the coaches. And it's like a lot of time and often resources.
Yeah.
And people don't have access to that. They're taught not to think that way. It's just like there's so many things against us. And I don't know.
And the things that we've had, like religion, which should have guided us out of it, has been corrupted to guide us more deeply into it. But yeah, I always think that, like, if we thought that aliens were going to attack the earth, that could be one of the greatest things for humanity, because it would bring us all together. We'd all come together.
We love an other.
Yeah. If there's an other and the other was outside of us, we'd come together, like, to vanquish. Even if we didn't really need to vanquish, maybe they were there for like friendly reasons and support, we'd still, but even then the hate and fear in us would want to attack.
It's the motivating factor.
It's the sponsoring thought.
Yeah.
Is like, how can we get away from the sponsoring thought of fear when it's so entrenched in our kind of psyches and society?
See your local dominatrix and have them put you in the cage. This is all just advertising me. I don't know. But is there anything that's sort of come up for you in this time that you feel like you would like to share before we go to the next episode that we need to do next time?
I just, even in what you were saying there, have we really shifted and moved forward? And like, I look at relationships and the history of relationships, like love relationships, love marriages have really only been around for like 300 years. So like, we've shifted this marriage, this relationship thing from being a very contractual thing, a very like business thing, family oriented, into something that's about love. Yeah. Like, we're bringing more love into the world.
Yeah. I kind of feel like I get that there's an opportunity for us to lean into emotion and starting to see the totality of who we are. And then explore what that could feel and look like, and that could be seen as an advancement. But I feel like almost suffering will just become more and more nuanced. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that's maybe a nihilistic sort of view. But there's complexity to all of the systems. And perhaps it's just keeping on top of engaging with it and hiring your local coach.
Evolution takes time, right?
Yeah. But thank you so much for joining us and surviving my coughing fit. And working so hard to bring things together and then for others.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here.
So thank you for listening. Speak to you next time.